This edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by Carahsoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the data that's driving the federal government's workforce rebound, the people process that software can't solve, and saving money might be the wrong reason for tech modernization at DHS. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Office of Personnel Management's new data strategy for fiscal years 2023 through 26 includes 4 pillars. The director of OPM, Carahsoft, writes that strategy will, quote, lay a strong foundation of people, data, technology, and governance for long-term success. Ted Kaouk is Chief Data Officer at OPM, Chair of the Federal Chief Data Officers Council. Ted, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on the program. How did you determine that the 4 pillars in this strategy were the 4 things you wanted to focus on at OPM?
Well, Francis, we started with looking at the broader landscape and what's happening with digital transformation, the proliferation of artificial intelligence, and the demands that agencies have for increased focus on organizational health and performance. And all of that is really driven by data skills and access to data and data analytics. And so we took sort of a look at that landscape and really centered on 2 key areas of focus. One is our ability in OPM to ensure that the federal government has the needed data skills to deliver on all of the priorities I was just talking about and to deliver on the federal data strategy, from leadership to early career talent. And then also taking account of the fact that OPM has data on the largest workforce in the country, data on talent acquisition, demographics, attrition, organizational health, employee engagement, and our opportunity to provide value to agencies by developing data products that enable them to make decisions through a seamless customer experience with access to that data. You
snuck a couple of the pillars in on me in that answer, but the first one that is in this strategy is a strong data-driven culture. Yeah. Culture always seems to be the hardest thing for federal agencies to reorganize or reshape. How are you going to go about doing that regarding data at OPM, Ted?
Yeah. So we're thinking about the data skills needs of the federal government overall. So it really starts at the top with leadership. Our first objective in the data strategy for that reason is focused on updating the executive core competencies for the senior executive service to include data fluency. It's really important that through the leadership pipeline in our development that there's a real focus on asking the right questions. With the development of artificial intelligence, it'll be even more important for leaders to have those capabilities. We're also really focused on ensuring that we have the right competencies in place. So looking at our occupational series to see if they need to be updated and created for artificial intelligence, data analytics, data management. And there's also a large focus on recruitment into government. We've had, I think, some success with government-wide hiring actions. About a year and a half ago, we had a government-wide hiring action that brought 50 data scientists into government. We're going to be doing more of those this year. And there are some early success stories about the competitive nature of the mission. We'll take somebody like Charlotte McClintock, who came in and hit the ground running at the State Department, who got an opportunity to go to Egypt and provide on-the-ground data support to the climate negotiations team. Says it's the coolest data work that she's ever been able to do in government. Similarly, the U.S. Digital Corps Fellows have a great opportunity for agencies to bring in talent. We hired a couple of Digital Corps Fellows, Sahithi Adari and Justin Lewis, who have been doing fantastic work on the early career talent side, developing some of our government-wide dashboards. So we're really focused on how to tell that story about bringing in talent and how to upskill the teams that we have. And then I'll just add one more item there, is that we're also focused on how we leverage the fact that we may have, with the largest workforce in the country, the largest HR analyst community in the country. So in the HR data space, standing up things like an HR analytics community of practice, where we have a couple of hundred practitioners across government who are meeting every month to share the common questions they're trying to answer, best practices, and then that also provides us at OPM an opportunity to potentially scale some of the solutions that individual agencies are developing. So those are a few of the things in the data skills area that we're focused on.
You've mentioned AI a couple of times already, Ted, and industry and agency leaders always tell me data fuels artificial intelligence. What's the intersection between AI and what you're doing in the data shop at OPM and the data strategy that you're talking about here?
Sure. So, I mean, first I think we're going to be developing data products that enable a seamless customer experience. We want to take advantage of all the data we have and provide those tools to agencies. And we'll maybe talk about artificial intelligence, but we're starting with, let's provide better access to that data to agencies. And this, again, is things like the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, attrition, data on hiring, but we're also looking at the broader applications where artificial intelligence may be applied to reduce the level of effort in the hiring process, and the impact of some of the new technologies like generative artificial intelligence and what that would mean for the workforce in terms of their ability to do knowledge work in government. So that's something we're certainly going to be taking a look at.
Are those the kinds of things that you're referring to in pillar number 2, high quality human capital data products?
Well, I mentioned that we do collect data from across the human capital lifecycle at OPM.
Yep.
So we've been working with the chief human capital officers to understand what are the common questions that they have that we can deliver through those products. We've been working with our programs to create a seamless customer experience. With our data strategy, we released some initial public data products on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and things like the cyber workforce, but we're also developing role-based authenticated dashboards and a roadmap this year to deliver them on such topics as demographics, attrition, organizational health, and we want to continue to innovate. And as we move up that maturity scale from sort of descriptive analytics, providing through those exploratory dashboards, we're also going to be looking at how we better understand the reasons why things are happening. In the government, for example, we may find some significant distinctions on attrition as compared with the private sector, given that there are so many opportunities for people in the federal government to move between agencies. And what does it mean when they do so, and how do we know that?
Pillar number 3 is technology and tool modernization, and this is probably a question as much for the CIO at OPM, Guy Cavallo, who's talked about this on a number of occasions, as it is for you. But what does that pillar mean from your perspective as the CDO?
Well, it just, I think, reemphasizes our central role in collecting human capital data across government. We want to ensure that if you're a federal employee, you have access to the data that you need in one place, whether that's on data on benefits, on your personnel actions or decisions about your career. We want to make sure that the Chief Human Capital Officers come into a seamless environment to access that data. So we need to modernize our underlying platforms to enable that integration of the data, and we're working closely with Guy and his team to make that happen at OPM, and we're excited about that vision. We want to have a common set of tools so we can collaborate across OPM, but also so we can provide the ability for agencies to access and develop their own reports as well.
The 4th pillar is effective data governance, and I wonder, is that pretty much policy and process, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it covers a number of different components, but as I mentioned, as we're developing those products, we want to make sure that we have a common look and feel for them. So part of that governance is working with all of our programs to ensure that we're coordinating what we're releasing. We're also working to integrate a lot of our data through some of the data modeling work we're doing. This would enable a 360-degree view into employees across government, enable us to integrate data in a way that we can't do that today.
You talked about how this is not just, the goal is not just to serve data and make it available better at OPM, but to make it available across the federal government. Do you think you have an advantage in being able to do that, given that you have that cross-cutting view as the chair of the CDO Council? How does that help you make those connections? That's a good
segue into some of the work on the Federal CDO Council. And in fact, shared decision support across government is one of the key problem areas that the CDO Council has focused on for a number of years, going back to the pandemic. How do we provide agencies with data on workforce safety in a time of crisis? And some of the work that we've done and recommendations we've provided, which were an important input into the OPM data strategy on how do we create government-wide tools in HR, like some of the diversity dashboards that CDO Council initially created. So what I think we're also seeing is some of the progress that agencies themselves have made at that CFO Act agency level. You think about an agency like State, USDA, or Treasury. A few years ago, it would have taken weeks to get access to some of this HR emission data. And so we're taking a hard look at what that means both for the CDO profession, but also for opportunities for organizations to transform in the use of their data. And so we're looking at this concept of enterprise analytics. How do you stand up a program? How do you get buy-in? How do you integrate that data? And what should other agencies look to in terms of the best practices there? And I think also just taking note of what the CDO profession, how it's progressed over the last few years. We have CDOs that have already developed large enterprise teams, assistant chief data officers in the component areas that are coordinating all of their work, and we have CDOs that are still in office of one or maybe even dual-hatted. And so how do those best practices lead into the future for CDOs across government is something we're looking at. So there is a tie in there.
Ted Kaouk, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for coming on the program. You can find a link to the OPM data strategy and the federal government data strategy page at fedgovtoday.com. Coming next, the people process that software can't solve. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The military services each have human capital and recruiting projects underway to build their workforces for the future. Those efforts include systems upgrades and new ways of managing people in their careers. Mike McCalip is Vice President for Government Programs and Strategy at Carahsoft and former Fleet Master Chief for Manpower, Personnel, Training, and Education for the Navy. Mike, welcome. It's great to see you again. At Sea Air Space back in February, March, we talked about assessments on the FedGov Today podcast. You said they were very important for not just the sea services at that show, but also for the other military services. What does a good assessment of people programs mean for a military service?
Well, Francis, first off, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. So reflecting back on that conversation, you know, we think about human capital and workforce development and distribution is something that we absolutely have to get right for the warfighter on the waterfront or wherever they're serving. And so in listening to some of the requirements that have been built to provide that human capital, you know, today at Carahsoft, we have a lot of technology that can really help the government get around that problem and recruit. And, you know, it's not about just finding the new person. It's about assessing the right skill sets and then building that person through a 20 or 30-year career, having the opportunity to on-ramp and off-ramp at different times throughout their career. And so we have many different technologies that can help the government today in doing that, and many of them are deployed out there today.
You talk about a 20 or 30-year career. One of the challenges that that human capital folks are telling me, not just across the military, but the civilian side of the government too, is they're trying to prepare for a workforce that will be in for 2 or 3 years, 5 years, whatever, transition out to the private sector, come back, and so on. It's a lot more fluid workforce than it was maybe 15, 20 years ago. How does that influence the way that one should effectively build a system to manage a team?
Well, when you build that system, you have to understand what capabilities that person brings to the table, what training and also education needs to be completed throughout their career to build on those skill sets and deliver that right readiness.
Another issue is the freedom, the latitude that the individual service member has. The Army has a system where the soldier can go in and specify the things that he or she's most interested in, the assignments that they're most interested in. Does that change the way that someone thinks about not just building the system overall, but building the technological system that one puts in place?
I think it does, and you bring up an interesting point, and that is that today's workforce, you know, you and I are digital immigrants.
Yes.
Okay, today's workforce, they are digital natives, and they expect a world-class user experience. And what they don't want to have to do is sit down and write their name or their social security number or information 15 times on 15 different pieces of paper. So it's important that we provide them a world-class experience as we develop those skill sets throughout that career.
What are some of the tools that are available, all different varieties, for government agencies, not just military, but civilian too, to be able to manage that internal customer experience?
Right. So, you know, Carahsoft, we have in our ecosystem 400 of what I call best-in-breed and best-in-class manufacturers. And some examples that are used today in the government are Salesforce. And Salesforce is leveraged to provide that world-class experience and also collect that right data so that you can track that person throughout a career, and really helps us helps them on the, I have to remind myself that I'm no longer in uniform, but helps them on the accession side and also the developmental side throughout a career. You've got other platforms such as ServiceNow that can really focus on providing the right training at the right time to the right person before and during a tour. So there's a lot of things out there.
You can be forgiven for that because anybody I know that's been in the service says it gets in your blood. What should a government leader be looking for when he or she is trying to improve that customer experience for their internal customers?
You know, I think the government really has to come to industry with the requirements and then be flexible, because often we'll see the government will come with the requirements with no flexibility. And these systems are working around the globe, many of them, doing these jobs such as assessing, such as workforce development, and out of the box they function. So I think if I was talking to the government today, and we are, is to come with the requirements with some flexibility so that we can drive the cost down by using what's out of the box and then configuring some of that capability to meet their individual requirements.
Mike McCalip, great to have you here. Thanks very much.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
You can read more at fedgovtoday.com. Coming next, saving money might be the wrong reason for tech modernization at DHS. You'll learn why when FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Saving money probably won't happen if the Department of Homeland Security modernizes its information technology system. But the modernization effort will pay other dividends that might matter more. Kevin Walsh is Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at the Government Accountability Office. He testified recently about DHS's IT posture at a Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Subcommittee hearing. Kevin, welcome. The money quote from you at that hearing was, IT modernization may not be a cost-saving endeavor. You had a follow-on point to the committee, though, about that. What was that follow-on point, and why is it important?
So well, first, thank you for having me on the show. The follow-on point is that there's this common misconception that legacy systems, when we modernize them, we're going to save all this money. And that's not always true, as you heard. What we do get is better security, better functionality, and more efficient systems. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to figure out what the right balance is between investing those additional funds and security, efficiency and modernization.
Where is DHS now in its journey? That was one of the themes that I took away, that the DHS officials that testified claim progress. Do you see progress that DHS is making?
So DHS and the entire government are in the midst of a shift. For a long time, we have gone with the waterfall approach to development, which is a big, monolithic, multi-year endeavor across what winds up being many administrations. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, the government winds up with excess costs coming in late, and maybe not all the functionality that was initially promised. Mm-hmm. So we're moving away from that, though. The new paradigm, the new development methodology is an incremental methodology or an agile methodology, which emphasizes developing functionality in shorter bursts. The advantage of that is if the contractor winds up failing spectacularly, the government actually has something to take away from the effort. Mm-hmm. You also, if you see failures early on, you can cut it off before we are billions of dollars in debt and years behind schedule in some cases, as some of DHS's systems are. So you asked how DHS's progress is going. Right now, DHS is in the midst of that shift. Mm. They have moved many programs to this new methodology, and they are struggling with some of their older programs. In that testimony, we highlighted 3 different programs that DHS has had underway for a long time, and in some cases, this is not their first swing at this particular effort. So those modernization, those old modernizations are still in flight, and DHS is still working diligently to address them.
I'll put a link to the testimony that you talked about at fedgovtoday.com, but this agile approach, I went back and looked. I did the first interview on any of my products about agile development in the federal government in 2009. What have we learned, and how far have we come in 14 years, Kevin? You look at this all across the civilian side of the federal government. I think we've talked about some DoD projects too in the past. Are we getting anywhere?
So this is not an instantaneous shift.
Sure.
Nor would you expect it to be.
Of course.
First, you're gonna have all of these big multi-year projects that are underway that you need to finish, or wait for them to not quite finish, as we have seen all too often.
Yes.
So changing them over is not a instantaneous effort, and culture shift in the government is, again, like moving a glacier, right? It's going to take years of effort to demonstrate, hey, we can do this, and this is the right way forward. There is a lot of momentum with the older methodologies, and frankly, we also probably don't have all the workforce skills to fully move over to Agile. We can't probably drop everything today and shift entirely over to this new methodology just because of that skills gap.
What do you think the skills gap is? Where are the areas that the government would need to fill in order to be able to make that swing final?
So Agile development requires personnel who are very, very good at interfacing with their peers, with their stakeholders, and with management. And those short sprints, as they are called in Agile, require constant iterations with the stakeholders. You know, why is this important? Whereas with the older waterfall methodology, you basically can be stuck in an office somewhere doing code for months, if not years, without seeing the stakeholders or your hopefully you're seeing management more frequently than that. But so it's I think a shift in the way business is done. I don't think it's an insurmountable, oh, we need this skill or that skill. It's learning, okay, how do we do this new way where we fail fast or succeed early?
It sounds like mostly what you're talking about is a skills gap in the technology areas. Is there a skills gap in the acquisition field as well, or has the government gotten better or good at acquiring agile development pieces?
So, spot on, Francis. There are different ways that we need to acquire these big programs. Historically, again, a lot of those big efforts were either firm fixed price or cost plus, where they were paid a price and then add-ons happened as they went along. So another shift that is going on that you also heard about in the hearing is the shift more towards cloud-based services, where the department or the programs really don't have to worry about building the back-end infrastructure. That's all hosted centrally, whether by the government or by a big cloud provider. So that also reduces the amount of development needed to build an interface, because you're not worrying about all the back end as well. And it allows us to concentrate more on what the citizens or the employees will be using.
What is next? Who needs to do what in order to have success in the areas that you've just described?
Sure. So in our testimony statement, we talked about specific actions that needed to be taken for the reports that we cited. So in total, we had three different programs at DHS. First was the Financial Systems Modernization. Second was DHS's HEART program, which handles biometrics, fingerprints, and the like. And the third was a grants modernization program at FEMA. Collectively, DHS has done a good job addressing our recommendations. We made, across those three areas, a total of 19 recommendations. DHS, to their credit, has addressed 11 of them, and some of these reports are relatively recent. So they're working and they're doing their job. The bigger picture, though, of what DHS needs to do to address its legacy systems is getting a grasp on where the systems are, which at first blush may set you back, and you might think, what do you mean DHS doesn't know where all of its IT systems are? Well, there are a lot more IT-based products out there right now than most people regularly think of. With the Internet of Things, you might have a badge scanner on the door to your building that is networked. Does the CIO shop know about that system? Is that looped in? So making sure that the CIO shop in DHS has awareness of all those systems, and I think DHS does a pretty good job of this, but every agency could be better. Once you have that idea of where all the systems are, the next step is figuring out, okay, what's doing well and what do we need to think about modernizing? So figuring out and doing that assessment is second step. Third step is actually making the go, no-go on these systems and saying, okay, we have our scarce funds, we need to invest it here. And the government's motivations, by the way, are different than private sector. Private sector is entirely profit motivation. Government is, what can we do with the scant resources we have to best service the taxpayer or the mission, or to address other things like critical cybersecurity risks and the mission performance. So it's a balancing act. It's not quite the dollar trumps all.
We have about a minute left, Kevin. What do you see in the work that you did at DHS or the work that you've done across government? What do you see that agencies can do quickly to get some wins and be able to say to their internal customers, to their own people, we're on track, we're making progress?
So the easiest way to get quick wins is cybersecurity related. If there is a breach, that reflects poorly on everybody in leadership, and everybody in the agency is impacted. We've seen breach after breach after breach from OPM to all kinds of other issues where we don't necessarily want to experience those outcomes again. So I think if there is a cybersecurity risk, be aware of it and be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. But part of that is also what I described earlier, knowing where your systems are. So figuring out, okay, what do we know and what might be out there that we don't know about, and trying to make sure that you have adequately captured those in your oversight.
Kevin Walsh, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you, Francis.
You can read Kevin's testimony and more GAO work Kevin talked about. Find a link to watch the hearing he testified at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. FedGov Today is presenting Innovation in Government from GeoInt. The lineup for this show includes leaders from the NGA, the National Reconnaissance Office, more government agencies, and industry. You can watch the show Tuesday evening, 8:30 on WJLA 24/7 News. Set your DVR or watch it on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. The Chief Information Officer of the Defense Department, John Sherman, will be here, along with his deputy CIOs. Hope you'll join me then. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching FedGov Today. Have a great week.